SQL stands for Structured Query Language, and it's a language that's used to query common databases, which, not surprisingly, are called SQL databases. And they are very, very commonly used. Is that moving? Yeah. So just by way of background, most websites, they're not actually static websites with static web page files that get served up to the user. Actually, there's a database behind the website. And when a user submits, for example, a search query, that query actually ultimately goes to the database. It's put into a SQL query, go to the database, the query is executed, and then the results come back and they're dynamically put into a web page, which is then served up to the user. So effectively, that is how it really works in most cases. Now, when you put something into a web form, here's an example which I've got from W3 Schools. Select user ID, name, password from users, where user ID equals whatever. So if you enter 105, what it's doing is it's going to the table called users. It's looking for what corresponds to the user ID 105 and getting the user ID, name, and password that corresponds to user ID 105. Now, the problem with this is that if the input that's entered by the user is not sanitized before it goes into a SQL query and goes to the SQL database, then anybody who's using that form could enter SQL queries and thereby get information from the database, change it, delete it, etc., etc. An example given there is 105 or 1 equals 1. 1 equals 1 is true. That could then return everything in the database. All the user ID, name, and password could be put into a web page and displayed. And it's not just web forms, but also URLs, like in this example here, put ID equals 105. People can play around with what's in the address bar and get information from SQL databases that way if they haven't been properly set up, if the coding isn't right. And this SQL injection is number 1 in the OWASP list. OWASP is the Open Web Application Security Project. They've been publishing the top vulnerabilities for years, every 3 years, and another one's due this year, and SQL injection and its ilk are at the top. And that's been the case for years. So for years, this has been the main vulnerability. The ICO here, they've had lots of fines, undertakings, etc., which are to do with SQL injection. And in fact, it's so common that even the European Commission website has suffered from SQL vulnerabilities. That was reported quite recently, and hopefully they fixed it by now, but it is very, very common. We're going to now leaven it by alternating something technical with something slightly less technical. This one is slightly less technical, but it's really important because it's very, very common. And this is failure to patch or update software. So what is patching? Patching is simply taking an updated version of a software and then installing it over your existing version. So you're updating your software. And updated software is frequently issued not just to improve the features available to the user, but also to fix security vulnerabilities that are discovered. And I'm sure you've heard the phrase zero-day vulnerabilities. They are defects, security defects or flaws in the software which were inherent. They were there from the outset, from 0 day, but they've only been discovered later. And by way of examples, well, often with your Windows updates, there will be security fixes. WordPress is a popular blogging and content management system, and it's quite common for WordPress to be attacked because it's popular. So different versions of WordPress can be updated. Plugins for WordPress often have security issues, and they need to be updated too. And you've heard of things like shell shock, Heartbleed, etc. Those have had patches to try and fix them, but not everybody has installed them. Not everybody has patched for those vulnerabilities.